Melissa Turner was finally feeling comfortable in her own skin. She was looking and feeling fabulous. She found a way to be completely herself. She was able to live a life full of cosplay and make-believe, and she was able to make money from it. After years of feeling insecure and unloved, she finally grew the confidence to live the life she's always wanted. What would eventually happen to cause her to lose everything?
Hello?
I need paramedic.
Melissa grew up in Tampa Bay, Florida, where she had a loving family and a good upbringing. Her biggest struggle growing up was her weight. As a teen, she had trouble keeping her weight off, and this greatly affected her self-confidence. Which is understandable. We are incredibly vulnerable in our teenage years, and all we want to do is fit in. And when we don't, we feel like there's a huge bullseye on our back, and we never feel comfortable in our own skin. For Melissa, one of her favorite pastimes was cosplay, where people dress up as their favorite fictional characters. The creativity and skills of some cosplayers is actually quite impressive, from the handmade costumes to the hours dedicated to replicate these characters' mannerisms so precisely. Unfortunately, a lot of the female characters in cosplay don't favor a heavier set woman, and if you aren't confident in your body, it could be difficult to participate. But don't let that stop you. There are plenty of women and men who can definitely rock some amazing cosplay, no matter their size. But again, it's up to the individual and how comfortable they feel. Melissa loved cosplay, but didn't feel that she could participate in it because of her size. This added to her depression, and she went through her teenage years and college years feeling inadequate. By the time she graduated college, she had had enough of feeling this way and decided to make some major changes to her lifestyle. She felt that her weight was holding her back, from finding a better job to having a better love life. So she started working out and eating better, where in about 2 years she went from 250 pounds to about 150 pounds. She lost 100 pounds and gained a massive amount of confidence. She started posting anonymous, scandalous photos of her body online and was receiving positive feedback. She finally felt ready to date seriously and take pride in herself. In 2013, Melissa met a man who became her first real boyfriend. Things were going well, Melissa was loving herself, her new boyfriend, and she was finally confident enough to start participating in cosplay. She eventually took her new hobby even further and merged it into a source of income. Melissa met a woman who introduced her to the online entertainment world, where adult content could equal big money. She was already posting photos anonymously, so she realized she might as well monetize on it. A cam girl generally gets paid for performing acts in front of a camera for money. Melissa was immediately intrigued and jumped in with both feet. Why not? She felt she had nothing to lose. She had this new belief in herself, and she was already receiving great feedback from the cosplay world. And at that, she created Two Thorned Rose. It didn't blow up right away, but she kept at it, and after a couple of years, she started generating a steady income and was able to quit her other jobs.
If you don't know who I am, if you never heard of me or anything like that before, I am Two Thorned Rose. You can call me Rose. I'm a cam model. I'm an artist. I love fitness. I've lost 100 pounds. I like making videos about that and about my art and just about my daily life. And my channel over on YouTube, where I was doing all of that stuff, got deleted. I am here hoping to make Twitch my new home. Hello, thank you.
A cam girl doesn't necessarily always translate to sexual acts, although that does tend to be a common factor in many channels, and with hundreds, if not thousands of new faces popping up daily, it can be difficult to keep fans returning to your content, which can be frustrating when trying to make a living from this profession. Many online forums had restrictions on what type of content could be posted, so eventually Melissa had to create her own independent channel, where her following helped pay for her to act in and produce her own adult films. Most of the themes of her films were horror-based, and October was a big month for her. She did well, so much so that she and her boyfriend sought the opportunity to make more money by renting out their studio and their video equipment to other camgirls to do the same. They were a strong team, and this hobby had definitely turned into a career. But the only downfall was that the business only worked as long as the relationship worked. And slowly, as the cracks started to form between the pair, so did they within the business. Melissa tried to manage it all on her own, but once the couple officially ended, so did the studio business. Although Melissa did her best, things just didn't run as smoothly.
My ex-boyfriend Dickface, after we had been together for a while, and I had so many girls asking me about camming, if I could help them, blah blah blah, he was like, let's start a studio. Let's have cam rooms. I spent so much time focusing on that, focusing on other people, focusing on other shit. I feel like I could have done so much more and be so much more ahead of where I am now if I had put all of that fucking time and effort into me and my shit. But it is what it is. Having the studio taught me a lot about working with other people. The studio thing just turned into me doing all the work, me finding the girls, me doing all the editing, all the setup, all the every fucking thing. I did everything and I'm so goddamn mad.
After some time alone, Melissa continued to work on herself, and in 2017, she met and started dating Matthew Trussler. Matthew was a fun-loving guy adored by family and friends. He grew up in Massachusetts and after graduating college, chose to move to a bigger city. He decided on Tampa Bay, Florida, close to where his brother Sean already lived. It wasn't long before he was already getting himself established and making a proper future for himself. After living in Florida for a while, Matthew ended up meeting Melissa, where they hit it off right away. Matthew was a gentle soul who had a soft spot for animals and lived his life in a respectful, caring manner, so there was no question why Melissa fell for him right away. He was completely on board with Melissa's profession and even helped her with her videos. By 2019, they were engaged and these two were flourishing and really making a name for themselves. They were even able to buy a 4-bedroom house together in Riverview, Florida, and filled it with 4 cats and 1 dog. They were certainly living the American dream, and at such a young age, it seemed that they had already had it all figured out. Matthew was no doubt living the life he had always wanted, or at least that's what it looked like through the eyes of social media. Melissa and Matthew were each expressing to the world their happiness with each other, and everyone was happy for them. But like most things, and like we've all come to learn, not everything that we see online represents the whole truth. If you were to talk to those close to Matthew and Melissa, they would tell you that the two were constantly bickering, and apparently it was loud enough and often enough for the neighbors to notice. No relationship is perfect and no one expects it to be. But it seems that Matthew's brother Sean would go as far as to say that he felt that Matthew and Melissa's relationship was toxic. He felt that Melissa would keep Matthew from having relationships with his friends and family, and that she was controlling and manipulative. Now, toxic is a pretty strong word to use, and maybe he was just being overprotective, because it was his brother and everyone wants the best for their family. Or maybe Sean was onto something.
911, what is your emergency?
I woke up with my boyfriend. He was outside this morning. He's cold. He's gone. The kitchen's a bloody mess. He's not breathing.
Why is the kitchen a bloody mess?
I don't know.
What's your name?
No. Melissa Turner.
October 18th of 2019, at 8:45 a.m., Melissa made a phone call to 911, stating that she had found her boyfriend Matthew Trussler dead, outside on the back patio. She claimed to have found him unresponsive. She checked for his breathing and tried CPR multiple times, and when all those attempts failed, she called for emergency help. By the time paramedics arrived on the scene, it was far too late, and Matthew was gone. In fact, paramedics said that he was already in a state of rigor mortis when they had arrived. It was clear that whatever had happened was not an accident. Matthew had multiple lacerations and a very distinct deep stab wound in his back. His arms were covered in defensive wounds, and it might be safe to say that this was not a quick or quiet altercation. Matthew was clearly attacked, and it was brutal. Melissa, covered in dried blood, in complete shock after finding Matthew, was rambling and emotional, but was able to tell the officers at the scene that she had found Matthew outside on the patio, cold and already dead. She tells officers that she doesn't know what happened. She agrees to go to the police department because she wanted to help the police figure out what happened to Matthew.
A lot less glamorous than they make it on TV. We were having a great time.
Was there anything physical, violent?
He was never violent. He was always amazing with me.
She told them that the night before, she and Matthew had spent the night drinking.
I mean, that's what we did. We were there at the house ourselves. We had drinks. He always liked drinking. He was a drinker.
At about 11 p.m., she got tired and she went to sleep in her office chair, but Matthew kept drinking. She woke up the next morning and saw the condition of the kitchen and then went upstairs to look for him in the bedroom. It wasn't until she went back downstairs that she realized that he was outside. She ran to him and immediately started CPR. A police officer on the scene had Melissa put on orange latex gloves because she had so much blood on her hands that she was getting blood on everything she touched. She was told that she could take them off in the interrogation, but opted to keep them on for the time being.
Do you want to keep wearing those gloves, or do you want to take them off?
I'll leave them on for now.
When she was asked by the detective if she had any injuries or wounds, she says no, not that she knew of, and after some time, she was eventually asked to take off her gloves for evidence photos.
I have a little cut.
And that's from what?
I think it's from grabbing the glass.
Can you open your hand a little more there? Yeah.
Is that
hurt to open it up? Sorry.
Oh my gosh, I didn't notice.
This looks pretty good.
I didn't even notice.
Oh, wow.
I had no idea that was there.
She still claims that she doesn't know or remember what happened. She can't recall how she got the cuts on her body and is even shocked to hear about Matthew's injuries.
My problem is I got Matthew on the back porch with stab wounds.
Stab wounds?
On top of all the physical evidence found inside the home, they also had evidence taken from a surveillance camera posted in their living room and Nest cameras from their neighbors' homes. Specifically, a Nest camera positioned on a neighbor's garage that was pointed in the direction of Matthew's and Melissa's backyard. Unfortunately, their fence prevented the camera from capturing any video, but luckily the camera was able to pick up audio of what happened that night.
Tell me about what happened around 4 o'clock this morning.
4 o'clock? What happened at 4 o'clock?
I don't know, that's what I'm asking you.
I don't know either. Why?
Was there any arguing?
At 4 o'clock? Not that I know of. I believe I was asleep. I have no memory of any argument at 4 in the morning.
I have some video surveillance actually yelling and screaming between a male and a female coming from your house.
Further into questioning and after being confronted with this evidence, Melissa tells the detectives that what she had said earlier wasn't the whole truth.
I would say he woke me up and we got in an argument over that because he was still up at 4 in the morning drinking.
Okay, so just so I'm clear, you do have a memory of what happened, right?
Yes.
At 4 o'clock.
Yes.
Now, with her memory newly refreshed, she tells a different story. He woke her up at about 4 a.m., completely drunk and in a rage. They argued and he had attempted to hurt her. Melissa fought him off, which made him even more upset. He had managed to hit her a few times before he grabbed a kitchen knife and charged at her. She blocked the knife by grabbing it by the blade end, causing the wound in her left hand. Matthew tried to control her by full force after throwing her down and trying to strangle her. Melissa acted quickly by grabbing the knife and, in her own words, lightly stabbing Matthew in the back in order to defend herself. Now it's clear that this story and the original story are miles apart, and police have to question why someone acting out of self-defense would lie to the dispatch and the responding officers. We also have to take into account that everyone reacts differently out of shock, and that it was important to take in all the evidence and compare it to the stories told by Melissa, and they had a lot of evidence. First of all, Matthew was covered in defensive wounds as if he were the one being attacked, not so much the one doing the attacking. He also had a large laceration on his bicep and across his chest. Also, the laceration on Melissa's hand only made sense if she were the one holding the knife and her hand slipped down the blade. It didn't match the wound someone would receive if they were trying to stop a knife by grabbing it at the blade end. Things just weren't matching up. Detective Legassi spent hours listening and watching the surveillance from the neighbor's camera, staring at darkness and listening to the hum of a silent neighborhood until finally, at about 4 a.m., he could hear what he said was racketing in the background, the sound of things being broken. So he focused in, and then voices, screaming. The audio has not been fully released. I do have bits of it, and warning, it is horrible to listen to. But the transcript of the audio has been released to the public. Detective Legassi, who heard the audio, was asked to describe the tone of the voices and where the voices were coming from. He stated that the voices were coming from Matthew and Melissa's house, that the few times the male voice was heard was low and tough to distinguish, while the female voice was very, very loud, sounded very angry. At 4:30 a.m., a female is heard saying, "You, stay down," followed by the sound of breaking glass. 5 minutes later at 4:35, the same voice is heard saying, "I hate you," and "Get up," multiple times. A scuffle, followed by smacking sounds, and then the female voice says, "Get up," so being arrogant. "I hate you. Go yourself." And then, at 4:43 a.m., another scuffle and continued smacking is heard, and a male's voice. What was said is inaudible and unclear. There was continued arguing, and then the female voice was heard again screaming, "So die." "No," followed by, "What did I do?" This audio doesn't coincide with the story that Melissa was the one being attacked. She is heard saying "Get up," "Wake up," multiple times in between yelling slurs at Matthew. She seems in full control and had many chances to escape if she was in fact being held against her will. What we don't hear much of is Matthew's voice. If he was loud, if he was scary, if he was attacking her like she said, it seems logical that we would have heard more. From him at least, but all we seem to hear is Melissa on the attack and Matthew on the defense. Another piece of technology that aligned with the audio of the Nest camera was Matthew's smartwatch. Just minutes after we hear Melissa yell, "What did I do?" Matthew's smartwatch stops detecting his heartbeat. It was fairly obvious that Melissa was the cause of Matthew's death. She had even admitted it herself in the retelling of the story. But was it murder, or was it self-defense? She explains that she had actually told the 911 dispatcher that she had cut her hand, but she just forgot with all the shock of it all and was never purposely trying to hide it. She wasn't trying to hide anything, she just couldn't remember it all. We can't forget that when Melissa calls 911, Matthew was already cold and showing signs of rigor mortis. It was a full 4 hours before she called for help. She made no attempt to save him, and she lied about what had actually happened. It wasn't just a moment of intense action where she acted without thought and now regretted it. She wasn't caught up in the moment where it was her life or his. She waited until there was no going back before calling the police. With this information, police arrested Melissa for the murder of Matthew Trussler. While awaiting trial, Melissa voiced her innocence and stuck to her claims that she was the victim. She says that Matthew was always drunk and that he would threaten her and himself harm often. For some reason, the police never checked Melissa's blood alcohol level that night, but she admitted to drinking heavily, and when Matthew's was checked, his level was 5 times the legal limit in Florida. Melissa says that this night he was belligerent and aggressive, that he was acting possessed. She only stabbed him in self-defense, and that she only stabbed him that one time in his back. This was after the medical examiner says that the stab in the back was not the fatal cut, but in actuality, the cut on his arm hit a vein, and this is the cut that caused his death. When asked how he got the slash on his arm, she says that she doesn't know, but it wasn't her. The reason this wasn't brought up before was because she didn't remember. She claimed that she was suffering from a head injury from Matthew's assault, and that, along with the drinking, caused her to lose memory of that night. Matthew's family say that they believe that maybe Melissa expected and needed Matthew to be a part of her videos, which he did take part in for a while, but that it was draining and uncomfortable for him. There was a chance that he had decided that he wasn't going to do it anymore, and she couldn't force him to. Then on a night when they were both drunk, she snapped and possibly went further than she ever expected she would. Of course, it's all speculation and we don't know what truly happened that night. We can only theorize from the evidence at hand. And among that evidence is that video of the inside of their home that night. At 3:42 a.m., Matthew is walking around calmly away from Melissa, while Melissa follows him, clearly upset and frustrated. At 4:01 a.m., Melissa is running from the kitchen looking very stressed, but it didn't look like she was under attack. Then, moments later at 4:08 a.m., she stumbles back into the room where she looks exhausted, and as if she's talking to the air, contemplating her next move, again showing no signs of fear. In fact, at this time, you can see the blood coming from the gash on her hand. At this moment, it would make perfect sense for someone to pick up the phone and call the police, either because she was under attack as she claimed, or because she had just stabbed Matthew and he needed help. After a quick deliberation with herself, we see her turn back to the room where her supposed attacker was. I feel that this clearly shows that she was not in any fear of Matthew. We do know from the audio that arguing goes well past 4:30 to almost 5 o'clock in the morning, where Melissa and Matthew have a loud argument next to an open window in the kitchen. Melissa says that after their confrontation, she walks into her office, sits on her chair, and blacks out. And with the amount of blood found throughout their home, it makes sense that Matthew had been bleeding out from the time that she stabbed him until at least the time that she had decided to go to sleep. So she saw and she knew that Matthew was losing blood and that he was dying. Somehow, Matthew made it out to the pool patio through that same open window that they were arguing next to, where he succumbed to his injuries. The next thing we see in the video is Melissa waking up and walking through the house at 8:35 a.m., and then the phone call to 911 at 8:45 a.m. Was she extremely drunk and she snapped and decided to act on her anger where she stabbed Matthew and purposefully left him to die? Possibly. And that's homicide. Or was she extremely drunk and stabbed Matthew without intent to kill him, not realizing how bad his wounds were, then went into her office and blacked out, waking up to find Matthew dead? Possibly. And that's homicide. She was meant to go to trial in February of 2022, but there was a delay. She would talk big talk behind bars about all the money she had as a cam girl. They found recorded phone calls of her bragging about how much money she had in the bank from her business, and it frustrated taxpayers and prosecutors because they felt that she shouldn't be using taxpayers' money for a public attorney and that she should be using her own money to pay for her private attorney. All in all, it wasn't a good look for her, and she wasn't winning anyone over. She was offered a plea deal of 25 years, which she declined, and countered the 25 years with 5 years in prison. No agreement was made, and Melissa chose to go to trial. The trial was spent convincing everyone that Melissa was Matthew's victim, that he was abusive, and that she spent the entire relationship in fear of him. Melissa talked about his drinking and his depression openly. She stated that he wasn't the person everyone thought he was. I can only imagine the pain this caused Matthew's family. To lose a loved one so horribly and then to have the one who took his life drag his name and reputation through the mud. To have every bit of his life analyzed and then used against him when he isn't there to defend himself. Domestic violence happens on both ends, and yes, it's more common that the woman is the victim, but we can't deny the fact that it is possible and very often the other way around. With Matthew unable to tell his side of the story, was Melissa taking advantage of society's stereotypical understanding of domestic violence? The jury heard everything that Melissa had to say along with the evidence placed in front of them. Even with her constant story changes and manipulation, the jury couldn't deny the fact that Matthew was covered in defensive wounds, much more than Melissa. The Nest camera and smartwatch both show how long it took for Melissa to react after his stabbing, and Matthew had never shown any signs of being an aggressive or hateful person, which is backed up by the audio of the Nest camera. After trial and deliberation,
this jury did not believe her claims of self-defense, nor does this court.
The jury used the evidence and charged Melissa with second-degree murder. She was sentenced to 20 years and 6 months in prison. She will be released in the year 2040. It's odd and very lucky for Melissa that although she was given and yet rejected a plea deal of 25 years and then went to trial and lost, how in the end, after being found guilty, she still ended up receiving less than the original plea deal. I can't make sense of it, but either way, for Matthew's family, 20 years, 25 years, none of that can bring him back. There's no way to truly know exactly what happened that night or what was happening throughout the relationship. But from what we do know, Matthew had a kind heart. He was hardworking and stood behind those he loved. He was young and had goals that he was clearly working towards achieving. And it's a shame that someone he trusted and cared for took it all away. Thank you for watching this video. Please like and subscribe to show your support, and we'll see you in the next one.